Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another special episode. Today we're going to be talking about the three angry young men of British post-punk, and that is Graham Parker, Elvis Costello, and Joe Jackson. And with me today I have the wonderful Martin Popoff. You'll know him from The Contrarians, you'll know him from his dozens of books that he's written. So wonderful to have you on the channel. Thank you very much.
Yes. How you doing, sir? This is going to be a lot of fun. This is, I've been, so much scrambling around in my head on this, but yeah, let's see how it all comes out. So
yeah, it should be interesting. An early morning for you, a late night for me, and all together, we should get through this, which should be fun. So the basic premise of what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of these three artists. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually rank them. And I have a feeling that Martin and my rankings are going to be quite different because I think we actually came into these artists at probably different times. I'm guessing you probably got into them fairly early on, sort of late 70s, that sort of thing.
I would say that's a good question. I would say the two of them right away at the beginning. So at the start of their catalogs, and one of them 3-4 records in, kind of thing.
Okay. Whereas, me being a little bit younger, I sort of was more of a sort of early 80s when I really sort of was getting into music. So that was when I sort of discovered these artists. Okay. So I think that probably is going to actually cloud a little bit how I rank them as opposed to how Martin ranks them. So it should be very, very interesting, I think. So why don't we start straight away and give me your number 3 out of these 3 and a little bit about why that's the case.
Okay, so this idea of ranking them, I'm the guilty party. That was my idea. It's kind of weird ranking these guys because they're all, creative titans. They're all amazing. They're people. It's a little impersonal or mean to be ranking these guys. So when I think about ranking them, it's very personal to me. It's like which of these artists did I embrace the most and had the most emotional attachment to and all that kind of thing, right? So
yeah, very much the same for me. So
yeah. So starting at the number 3 slot, I'm going with Joe Jackson. And I wanted to show this one because this is one of his later albums that I was quite a fan of. And I put him here, we've often had the talk about we're huge music fans. And what happens quite often is we say we like way too many artists. We love everything, right? Or we respect everything, or we really want to give everything a try because we're just naturally huge music fans, right? Yeah. Joe Jackson is one of those guys that I feel like I've had this relationship with my whole life, since the start of his catalog, basically. But it's always been I'm a little bit in, I'm a little bit out, I'm a little bit coming back. I'm not into this sort of thing. So I have to admit, after playing lots and lots of his stuff, over the years, I'm not that huge a fan. I'm finding him a little bit almost like too mainstreamy. I mean, obviously he's clever and the lyrics are clever. But the music, I find, even from the very beginning, has been quite mainstreaming. To me, he's a cross between this conceit of the angry young man and Billy Joel. Or if you want to be even more, mean, and this is not mean because Bruce Hornsby, a lot of people really respect him, but angry young man and Bruce Hornsby. Right. Or Hagen Hardy and the angry young men. Right. But Billy Joel will suffice, I think. So I'm, even the biblical texts of the early albums, like, look, the Look Sharp period in this, where he's the most like an angry young man. Even that stuff, I find it's a little bit too safely almost Americanized new wave. It's nothing to do with punk whatsoever. Nothing to do with even post-punk, really. It's new wave, if anything, and it's very conservative new wave. It's the Romantics and the Cars and that kind of stuff. It's that conservative, and then he gets even more conservative. He becomes even more suave with the classical piano and the jazz and the classical and the big, huge, beautiful Steely Dan type productions. So this happens throughout his whole career, and he tries so many different things. which most of those I'm not on board with at all. To me, it's really only about the rock stuff. And like I say, even at that point, I'm just finding it just too generalized and of the world and mean median average of what music is out there. The lyrics are good, but they're not, super sharp. He's not looking really sharp with his lyrics, sort of thing. And to me, it's literally just like one small step less conservative than Billy Joel. So I have to put him there, even though I've owned all these albums all my life and I play them regularly and I try to go back and like him more. But it just never happens.
Yeah, fair enough. I thought our lists were going to be quite different, and I've already been confirmed on that. So
excellent. Good.
We'll get into it. I love all three of these artists, so ranking them was difficult. Certainly my number 2 and number 3 were quite difficult. But for my number 3, I've gone with Graham Parker.
Okay.
I went back and I listened to his first sort of 5 or 6 records to prepare for this show. And I noticed that, as far as the Angry Young Man thing goes, vocally, he's an angry young man right from the get-go. But with the Rumor, it takes them a couple of albums to get the anger musically behind him. I find that those first couple of albums, I really enjoy them, but they're sort of, musically sort of fairly polite, sort of R&B and, little bits of country rock, little bits of reggae in there. I always found it, when I first listened to Howling Wind, and it's got the original version of Don't Ask Me Questions. It wasn't the version I was familiar with, and it was quite jarring for me how sort of slower and more reggae it is than the one that ended up being released as a single from the Parkerilla, which is much more straight ahead and driving. But I found that he really sort of started to get the Angry Young Man with this album, Stick to Me. Although, this album obviously had its terrible problems with, being recorded once and then the tape disintegrating, and they had to re-record it again in a week, and he wasn't very happy about it. And but then for me, the great Graham Parker albums for me are the next two. There's Squeezing Out Sparks and The Up Elevator.
Escalator,
sorry, yeah. And I love both of those albums. Like, I think they just really, really fit into that whole Angry Young Man thing. The sound of them is great. Funnily enough, one of the very first Graham Parker songs I ever came across was from The Up Escalator, and it was Stupefaction. And I came across that song because when I was a kid, I was given this compilation album called The Rock Album, which rather incongruously had, stuff on it that wasn't rock at all. I mean, it had Lotta Love by Nicolette Larson on it, which I wouldn't call rock at all. But it had Stupefaction on it, and I really, really loved that song. It was probably one of my 2 or 3 favorite songs on that compilation. And and then the other thing that was kind of a hit here, it was more of a radio hit than a chart hit, was Life Gets Better, which, he's getting more sort of commercial sounding by that stage. And he's lost the Rumor by that stage. Interesting thing about all three of these artists is they had sort of really standout backing bands. Graham Parker had the Rumor. Elvis Costello had the Attractions, and Joe Jackson had the Joe Jackson Band on those first 3 albums. And, they really helped shape the sound of these artists. But, I really, really like Graham Parker. I just like the other 2 a little bit better. So that's why I'm ranking him at number 3.
Okay.
Still some great stuff there.
More on him later, and not
Yes.
now, actually much later. So my next choice is this guy, Elvis Costello. Now my relationship with Elvis Costello, this steps way up from the Joe Jackson. I mean, I loved all those early albums. I'm just going to, surreptitiously in the background here, dial up while I'm talking to you the discography, which Elvis Costello actually, maybe I don't need to see that, but Elvis Costello actually has now 32 albums out.
Wow.
Absolutely crazy. So what I love about Elvis Costello, I was a fan right from the beginning. I loved all those records. They came out super fast and they're still coming out super fast. The funny thing about him combined with, next to Joe Jackson is the same sort of thing where he went and explored jazz and classical and the Great Songbook. And Elvis Costello has done like bluegrass albums. He's done all sorts of stuff. And then I guess in later years, The Imposters sort of serves the purpose of The Attractions when he makes these rock albums and stuff. This is one of these bands that I feel like for me, would be a retirement band. When I talk about that idea, like, boy, if someone made me just spend a whole month locked in a basement with a catalog, this would be a good catalog, because I don't know those later albums all that well, but I know the first dozen or whatever. I bought them all as new releases. I've known them, my whole life. But yeah, what I love about him is the fact that I literally have no problem putting him on the same level as Bob Dylan as a lyricist. But it comes almost too fast. And when you do all of that, there are certain things people can ridicule about his lyrics, saying, oh, that's a little too smarmy or cheap or whatever, or coy. So his reputation kind of goes up and down. I almost feel like his reputation has been compromised by him just putting out too much stuff. That's the crazy thing about it. He definitely feels like definitely an angry young man, or maybe the angriest of these guys. I love what you said about Graham's voice, but Elvis can be that way as well. And Elvis can really spit the venom when he wants to, combining the voice with the lyrics, right?
Yeah.
And I love that rock and roll feel. I feel like that early stuff with The Attractions did have a very distinct kind of band to it. It was raw but still accessible. It's almost like the heaviest Joe Jackson stuff, just made with more personality and heavier and just more inventive and everything. It's like wildly entertaining Joe Jackson at his best. And so, yeah, all of that early stuff, I absolutely love. What more to say? Like I say, I think you could just study his lyrics for the rest of your life. You could play those records for the rest of your life. There's 32 of them. A lot of them I really don't like when he does go off into tangents. So it's a little bit like Joe Jackson, where just give me the rock albums. I'm happy. But yes, the other thing it reminds me a little bit of is my love for Prime Squeeze. It's Elvis Costello and Squeeze, musically at their best, kind of made the same sort of music at the same time. And I can't think of too many other artists that did anything like that. So yeah, of these three, we take a big jump up to Elvis Costello from Joe Jackson. Not sure what else to say. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, my number 2 is also Elvis Costello.
Okay.
So yeah, he started off with this album, My Aim Is True, which I think this album owes quite a bit of a debt to Graham Parker in the sound. He's hasn't got The Attractions yet. He's recording with a band called Clover, and they are much more of a sort of a pub rock country kind of band. And so they don't have the attack that the Attractions had. But lyrically, yeah, he's pissed off right from the get-go. And I really, really love that. And I mean, I also love that stance on that album cover.
Yeah.
So cool. But then he releases this album, which is my favorite Elvis Costello album, Next Year's Model. I think the Attractions sound incredible on this. I think Steve Naive is the secret weapon of the Attractions. He gives them a sound that makes him different from Graham Parker, makes him different from Joe Jackson. Just those wonderful swirling organs and all that sort of thing. But again, these albums I came to later. Funnily enough, where I started with Elvis Costello was sort of way back, sort of much later on in 1983 with Punch the Clock.
Yeah, great.
And the big hit off this obviously was Every Day I Write the Book. And, you know, that's where I really sort of learned to like him. And he's a lot less angry on that album. That album's definitely going for a more commercial sound. But I really, really liked it. But then I went and delved back into the earlier stuff and heard things like Oliver's Army and Pump It Up and all that sort of thing. And just, again, like you, I'm not familiar with the more recent stuff, although I really did love some of the stuff he did with Burt Bacharach, because I am a sucker for that sort of, you know, Great American Songbook kind of thing. And I think he does that really, really well. And they make a good team. I think one of the differences I see between you and I too is you like to stick to the rock stuff, whereas I love artists that are really eclectic and do go all over the musical map. So, and I like that about Elvis Costello, and I definitely need to go and listen to some of those later albums and hear the things he did with the, I can't think of the name of the string quartet he did an album with, or a couple of albums with.
Kronos? No.
I don't think it was the Kronos
No?
Quartet.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was, but
Right.
correct us in the comments.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, Elvis really, and it's funny you say he sort of had the most aggressive vocal. I also find him sort of counterintuitively the most melodic of the singers, of the three of them. And so he managed to have that aggression, but still with a lot of melody in his voice.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know, this album often gets described as a punk album. And I don't get that. It has the energy of punk, but it doesn't sound punk at all.
Yeah.
To me. You know, there's too much of Steve Naive on there with his sort of semi-classical keyboards and all that sort of thing to make it a really sort of pure punk album. But yeah, Elvis is my number two. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you mentioned Clover, so there's a link to Huey Lewis, and to me, Joe Jackson again. It sounds a little almost dangerously close to Huey Lewis and the News sort of thing as well. And you know, Elvis again on this rock thing. And you mentioned Burt Bacharach in that. I literally never want to hear Elvis Costello cover anybody at all, like do other people's songs, because he's such a great writer. I just want to hear him write. And I want to hear that Englishness, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to think about him not living in England or whatever with Diana Krall. And are they on Vancouver Island or in Vancouver or something? I can't remember, but they've, you know, he's one of my favorite British artists. He's almost like a Ray Davies to me in a way. And I just love that early Britishness and that link with Squeeze and all that. And, you know, it comes a little bit, it must be said that both Joe Jackson and Elvis Costello and Graham Parker, for that matter, there's a little bit of a morphing out of the pub rock scene as well at that. So there is that R&B thing, and there's the sped up, the Dr. Feelgood and the, you know, the Eddie and the Hot Rods thing, the Stiff Records thing coming out of that. And so you do get a little bit of the pub rock thing with these guys as well.
And of course, the other thing that Graham Parker and Elvis Costello had in common in particular was Nick Lowe as a producer for a number of those albums.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, he came straight out of that pub rock scene. I think he was part of Brinsley Schwartz, who ended up going into the Rumour.
Yeah.
And of course, he was heavily involved with the Stiff Records and all that sort of thing too. So there's that commonality between those two artists as well, which I think is rather interesting.
Yeah. All right. So my top choice, I didn't take the plastic off these, but I thought it would be kind of funny just to show very quickly my absolutely chaotic Graham Parker vinyl collection. I won't do the CDs, but I'll just do this quick. So we got Human Soul And a lot of these are signed because I got to finally meet Graham Parker. He came and played in Toronto, was absolutely amazing at a small pub called the Horseshoe Tavern. So we've got a Mona Lisa. We've got a 12-inch single here. We've got Live in America, another 12-inch single. We've got The Real Macaw, another gray area. On the wall, I've got a signed Graham Parker and Brinsley Schwartz because he was in the band when he came and played here. So that's up on the wall. We've got a Mercury Poison 12-inch, another gray area. We got a Stick to Me, another 12-inch. That's my up escalator that's on the wall. Another gray area, another Real Macaw. What was this one called? Steady Nerves. We got a Howlin' Wind. We got another Mona Lisa. We got another 12-inch. We got another gray area. We got a Parkerilla, and we got there's an interesting 12-inch there.
The Blackpink Parker.
We got one of these. Look Back in Anger. We got another one of these. Another 12-inch, and then another 12-inch. So yeah, Graham Parker, absolutely the top of my list. For strictly emotional reasons. I mean, some of my favorite albums of all time, without hesitation. When I think of my favorite albums of all time, I probably just my mind kind of misses Elvis Costello, but I could definitely see going back and putting some of those in pretty high. But Squeezing Out Sparks, The Up Escalator, The Real Macaw, Another Gray Area, those four could all go up into my top, and famously Squeezing Out Sparks and The Up Escalator are the heavier, grittier, earlier, the moving out of the pub rock era. The early ones I'm not that crazy about. That to me is where he really starts taking off, that 78, 79, and then moving into the slightly smoother Another Gray Area, and definitely smoother The Real Macaw. But I just love all those albums to death.
Yeah.
Obviously not as prolific as Elvis Costello. And I think, the lyrics are a little more conservative, a little less flashy, a little less smarty pants, right? Elvis Costello, that's the other thing people complain about. It's just a little too smarty pants for people, right? It's a little too, oh, look what I did there, sort of thing, right? And because there's so much of it, again, it's easy to criticize and find things that you go, oh, well, that's just a little too precious, Elvis, right? But with Graham Parker, I mean, I literally, and Bruce Springsteen actually guests, I think, on The Up Escalator. He does a little cameo or something. I think it's that one. But that just goes to prove, like, in that realm of the John Mellencamp, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, even, sort of cabal of artists like that, I absolutely put Graham Parker, and I think he's my favorite one. Certainly of any of those kinds of heartland rocker things, I put The Up Escalator in there, just start to finish. Just love that album to death. That to me is my favorite Bruce Springsteen album, right? Even though it's by Graham Parker. And you know what? I've got to say, for years and years, you know how there's rock and roll facts and trivia that you don't really think about, and you don't think you're wrong or know you're wrong or whatever. Like for the longest time, I as a kid, anyways, I remember getting in pictures mixed up George Thorogood and Pat Travers, right? And then in the 90s there were all these. There was Liquid Jesus and Jesus Jones, and there was King and King something or other. There's these Super Chunk and Super Suckers that you never quite sorted out in your mind. Jesus Lizard, right? The Jesus bands, the super bands. For the longest time, I think as a kid, when there was no internet, obviously we're talking early 80s or whatever, it would slip my mind, or I never really got figured out that, like, I swear in the very beginning, maybe even before I was a Graham Parker fan and slightly into it, I didn't even realize that he wasn't American. He was so pub rock, right?
Yeah.
He was so New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen, Southside Johnny, Mink DeVille, Willie Nile, all of these. I thought he was American actually for a while. And even still now, being a massive fan for so long, it's hard to wrap my head around even thinking of him as British, because, to me, I don't associate him with actually being in England. To me, I just associate him with having all these records on Mercury, all these American and Canadian releases.
Yeah.
For the life of me, for all that stuff I just showed you, yeah, in context all along the years, I never bought a UK import. I never bought a British copy of one of his albums. They were just always around, right? So I just subconsciously thought he was from the East Coast somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Which is really bizarre. But yeah, absolutely love the guy to death. He was a sweetheart when I interviewed him. We included him in my my book that I did for Penguin, Satisfaction, 10 Records That Changed My Life. So we had one of his, these are my 10 favorite records growing up. This was a book of 75 of those lists or whatever. And I interviewed him for one of those, and then saw the show. And like I said, Brinsley Schwartz was in the band. It was amazing seeing him finally come here, because he didn't really tour all that much. So I would say if you locked me in the basement with one of these three artists and said this is all you get to listen to for the rest of your life, I would pick Elvis Costello. But Graham Parker definitely has my favorite albums, and I have the most emotional attachment to Graham Parker. The last thing I want to say is that I almost feel like once we go to Graham Parker, I could go to Warren Zevon. And say those two together for me have a very, very similar sort of attachment and feeling about their catalog. So there you go, Graham Parker.
Well, I'll just add in there that I'm a massive, massive Warren Zevon fan. So absolutely love his stuff. I just wanted to quickly pull out my copy of Stick to Me Again. I don't know if you can see there. This has got some of the most impressive laminate rippling you will ever see on a record.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
But so as everybody will have guessed by now, my number one is Joe Jackson. And again, I think my reason that Joe Jackson is my favorite is probably the same reason that Joe Jackson is your least favorite, in that it's just that he does so many different things. I mean, I started off with Joe Jackson with the Night and Day album, which was, his biggest hit album. I mean, Steppin' Out was a huge hit in the States, and I'm assuming it was in Canada as well.
Yep.
Funnily enough, the big hit here in Australia was Real Man, and it wasn't a hit anywhere else. So go figure with that. But I love the sort of Angry Young Man period, the Joe Jackson Band period. I mean, you've got songs on here like One More Time. Just, to me, just a gorgeous, just fabulous, rip-roaring album opener. It's got the hit, Is She Really Going Out With Him? Look Sharp has always been a great song that I've loved on this album as well. I mean, you have a couple of songs that maybe don't quite hold up, like Do the Instant Mash, which is a bit of a throwaway, but I like this album. And then I'm the Man came out the same year, 1979. And, you were saying he was the sort of least influenced by punk. I think the title track on this album is pretty darn punky, if you really get down to it. And then you got this one, which didn't do nearly as well. Beat Crazy. And this is where he starts getting more eclectic. And also he, like Graham Parker, definitely had a taste for reggae, which of course is something that the punks shared too. Bands like The Clash were really, really into their reggae. But this, to me, this lyrically is a really, really dark album. Some of the songs on here, In Every Dream Home a Nightmare, even One to One is a really dark sort of, song about, why won't you pay attention to me? You're out doing all these other things. And then, Someone Up There, Crime Don't Pay, which is, just this great little song about how crime actually does pay for this guy. Battleground, just, really talking about, race relations and that sort of thing. Biology is one of the best sort of relationship songs for me on this album, because it's just really, cuts down this idea that men are the only ones who can be the promiscuous ones, and showing, yes, actually, women can be just as promiscuous as men can. And then Fit, to end the album, a really song that's ahead of its time. I mean, the first verse is basically talking about, transgender people and how society treats them. And then the second verse is about sort of mixed race people and how they, don't get seen as one or the other by, black people or white people. Lots of wonderful lyrics, I think, on this album, but very dark. And then he goes completely left field and does Joe Jackson's Jumping Jive, which is an album of swing and jump blues covers. And I love this. I grew up, my dad was big into sort of big band jazz. And so I really connected with this album when it came out.
So that's his first doing that. And then Elvis Costello did Almost Blue, right? He did
exactly in the same year. They were both in 1981, which is really kind of coincidental. Yeah. And then Elvis Costello is, rather than doing a jazz album, he does a country album. So, and then the other thing I wanted to bring up, I mean, I love the excursions that he did. I've got a couple of the later CDs here because they're not on vinyl. Night Music, just really beautiful, sort of classical style music, with only 4 of the 10 tracks having vocals, the rest of them being instrumental. This album, I'm just going to share a little personal anecdote, if that's okay. About 11 years ago, my father passed away, and I was at the hospital when he died. And he lived up in Toowoomba, which is about a 2-hour drive from where I live. And on the drive back from the hospital, after he passed away, I listened to this album. And I just found it perfect for that particular point. So I've always had a real soft spot for that. And then the Heaven and Hell album, his concept album about the 7 deadly sins, where he combines sort of really classical things, but then there's electronica on it. And then there's one song that's just an out and out rock song, which is the Anger song. I feel like this is one of my favorite Joe Jackson albums. But the other little bit of trivia I wanted to bring up was going back to the one you showed, Blaze of Glory. The song, The Human Touch, on this album, it actually quotes a Graham Parker song from the Up Escalator. The song, I've got it written down here, No Holiday Back. No Holding Back, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting.
Yeah.
No Holding Back. There's lines in that where he sings about having the telephone stuck it to my ear.
Yeah.
Still
shaking, but not with fear and all that. Yeah, it's my favorite Graham Parker song, I would say. Yeah.
Well, Joe Jackson quotes those lyrics and the melody in that song, The Human Touch. Go back and listen to it and you'll hear it.
Neat. Yeah.
So, yeah, Joe Jackson is my favorite because I just love pretty much everything he's done in all the different genres and styles. I mean, he even did a progressive rock album. He did his Symphony No. 1, which is an instrumental album written in the style of a symphony, but played with rock instruments. And it really sounds like instrumental progressive music. And yeah, I just really, really love the depth and the breadth of Joe Jackson's catalog. And that's why he's my favorite. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Joe Jackson is a top 10 artist for me all time. So
Maybe, for all the praise we always throw upon Frank Zappa for being such a genius, it's like maybe Joe Jackson should be put in that camp because of what he's done, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you look at his album Willpower, which is an orchestral album that he did. He didn't just write all the pieces for that. He orchestrated them all himself because unlike Graham Parker and Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson was a classically trained musician. He went to the Royal Academy of Music and studied composition and percussion, I believe. Mm-hmm. So, he always had that sort of in his back pocket to do. So I definitely agree with the sort of the Frank Zappa comparison there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, these guys are absolute titans, of this stuff, and they all have their different strengths, right? And and my top one, unfortunately, I think has the least strengths of all of them, right? I mean, Elvis Costello is a Bob Dylan level lyricist, and Joe Jackson is a Frank Zappa level, musician, right?
Yeah.
And Graham Parker to me is that's the one I have the most emotional attachment to. Right?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough too. I mean, Graham Parker probably didn't go as wide musically as Elvis Costello or Joe Jackson did, but what he did do, he did very, very well.
Yeah.
So there you have it, everybody. That's our ranking of the 3 angry young men of British post-punk. Please let us know in the comments which ones of these are your favorites, which ones you maybe don't like so much. If you're sort of not super familiar with these artists, I'd strongly urge you to go and go to your listening app of choice, play some of the albums that Martin and I have mentioned and have a listen and tell us what you think in the comments. Love reading the comments. It's really, really great. Martin, please let us know where everybody can find you. And I'll make sure that I put links in the description for all of these things so that you can find them easily.
Yeah, well, we have a video channel called The Contrarians, which, of course, you're one of our esteemed guests on quite often. I have an audio podcast called History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. 178 episodes at this point, haven't missed a week. And all my books are at martinpopoff.com. There's PayPal buttons for everyone. I sign them, send them out of the office here, mostly hard rock and punk and heavy metal and all that kind of stuff, but a few other things in there as well. Yep. So yeah, that's those are my coordinates.
And for my viewers, I don't know if Martin still has any of these in stock, but I can highly, highly recommend the David Bowie at 75 book. My son was very kind enough to buy that for me for Father's Day, because we have Father's Day in September in Australia. I don't know why, but we do. And he bought that for me and I've read it cover to cover and it's absolutely wonderful and it's beautifully put together, lots of pictures, and just talks about 75 different points in David Bowie's career. Absolutely wonderful book.
Oh, thanks for that. Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I've got a ton of other videos on the channel now, and they're all playlisted. So if you want to go and look at some of my studio albums ranked shows, which, just to let you know, Martin, I'm actually quite a bit of a Billy Joel fan, so there is a Billy Joel studio albums ranked there. Yeah. But yeah, there's a playlist for that, or if you want to watch some of my In Defense Of episodes, there's playlists for that, my reviews, playlists for that, etc., etc. My video last week did really, really well. Thank you so much for that. It was the first episode in my Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush series. Looking forward to doing more of those episodes as they come up. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Bicycle Legs on Instagram and Twitter, however long Twitter's lasts, who knows. On Instagram, I'm mostly posting the records I happen to be listening to at the time, as well as posting channel updates. On Twitter, I talk about anything and everything, but I am definitely trying to give that more of a music focus. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.